I used to think the scariest thing in my job was weather. I'm a port maritime wayfinding systems integrator, which means I live in the ugly, invisible layer between ships and catastrophe. I service ECTI's units, calibrate dockside antenna arrays, and keep the AIS routing safety corridor software honest. My whole job is supposed to make sure the charts the pilots and harbor masters see are consistent, signed, and tamper-free, if a vessel says it's here. The network should agree. If a corridor tells a pilot to turn north of a dredged channel or stay clear of a crane swing zone, that advice has to be based on real, verified data. At Harbor Point Container Terminal in Galveston, that matters even more in winter. Early 2023, we were getting slammed by cold fronts, wind chop, fog banks rolling in off the bay, and enough radio clutter to make the AIS feeds look like they were being swallowed by static. The port leaned hard on the safety corridor software during those weeks. When visibility goes bad, people trust the machines more than the horizon. I spent most of my nights on the dockside catwalks with a tablet in one hand and a radio in the other, watching antenna health, checking time sync, clearing packet loss, and making sure every buoy tugged. An inbound container ship was where the system thought it was. That was all routine until the night I saw the system cite an AIS message that hadn't happened yet. I remember the exact feeling because I actually laughed. It was around 2:14 a.m., wind screaming through the gantries, and I was at the south array cabinet running a routine calibration sweep. My maintenance laptop was connected to the corridor manager through the dockside network, and the chart on my tablet flickered. A new vessel advisory appeared in the live layer. Inbound tug Angela M. had allegedly broadcast a correction advising all traffic to hold east of Corridor 3 until 02:17 due to restricted maneuvering near berth 12. The timestamp said 02:16. I looked up at the clock on the laptop, 02:14. It was such a basic, impossible thing that I thought some junior operator had fat-fingered a replay test into production. Then the advisory signature verified cleanly. Not just valid, clean, the chain of trust held. And before I could even pull the log window open, the chart on my tablet did something I have never seen any certified navigation display do in my life. It rewound, not metaphorically. The corridor lines on the chart snapped backward one version at a time. The vessel icon for Angela M. slid in reverse along its track, and the event marker vanished as if the advisory had never existed. The audit ribbon refreshed and showed no anomaly, no correction, no packet collision, just a pristine, continuous history with the message absent from the record entirely. I stood there staring at the screen while rain hit the cabinet door like handfuls of gravel. I checked the antenna feed, the NTP source, the local cache, the signing service, the message queue. Everything was green, everything was clean. I told myself I'd witnessed a transient UI bug caused by a timing conflict in the storm. That kind of rationalization is basically a professional reflex in my field. If you work around maritime systems long enough, you learn to distrust your own eyes before you distrust the network, but the advisory wasn't gone. It was sitting in a mirrored audit journal on the maintenance laptop, one layer down where the user interface doesn't usually let you go unless you have admin access. I opened the raw record and found a full AIS frame with a valid source, a valid GNSS timestamp, a valid digital signature, and a route corridor hash that matched a configuration package I had never deployed. The source field was what made my skin go cold. It listed a cabinet ID from the North Dock equipment row, a cabinet that should have been offline for months. I knew that cabinet, everyone did. It sat in the narrow service corridor behind the reefer control building, behind a locked steel door with a dead warning light and a paper label saying out of service power removed. During a hurricane prep review in late 2022, the contractor had told us the box had been disconnected, stripped of its radios, and left in place because taking it out would interrupt a fiber splice bundle. It wasn't supposed to do anything except collect dust. I walked there with my flashlight in the rain anyway. The service corridor smelled like salt, diesel, wet concrete, and hot insulation. The cabinet was there, same peeling label, same corrosion around the base, but the lock was new, not just new, actually sealed. A numbered security tag threaded through the latch. I called the night supervisor, who told me he'd never seen that cabinet active in any log, and that if I had a problem I should ticket it for the morning shift. That would have been the end of it if the next update hadn't arrived while I was standing in front of the box. A live corridor bulletin came through saying a bulk carrier departing channel side was to hold position until the inbound pilot cutter cleared the east turn. The advisory was signed from the same cabinet ID. I opened the raw frame in a terminal window and watched the source metadata populate in real time. The odd part wasn't just the valid signature, it was the time. The message had been generated 17 minutes earlier, not received, generated. The port's network time should have made that impossible. Every navigation device on the terminal was disciplined to the same GNSS-backed source, and the safety corridor manager enforced monotonic event ordering. The whole point of the system, it doesn't just log what happened, it keeps the entire harbor in one consistent timeline so nobody can accidentally route a ship through a crane path because one sensor was lying 5 seconds ahead of another. I went back to the office trailer and pulled every file I could touch. Antenna timestamps, corridor version histories, AIS ingest buffers, signed telemetry logs. The normal story was there, but when I queried the oldest retained copy, the record changed under my hands, not the live dashboard, the actual file. I'd read a line, switch to another pane, switch back, and the text would be different. One ship's track said it had passed the outer buoy at 0103, then 0101, then 0104, then after I exported the file and opened the export on an isolated machine, it settled on 0102 like it had been choosing from several options and finally picked the one it liked best. I started seeing the phrase deterministic conflict resolution in places I didn't recognize, hidden in JSON comments, buried in version manifests, woven into route corridor diffs. It wasn't a vendor string I knew, and I know most of them. There was no standard port safety software package using that phrase, but whatever it was, it had a rule set, and the rule set was making my evidence agree with itself by force. The weirdest part was how consistent the corrections were. The system never erased everything. It preserved the shape of events, but it adjusted details until all the logs matched a single accepted history. At first, I thought some contractor had built a shadow simulator and accidentally connected it to production. Then I found the first real breadcrumb, the equipment closet. It sat behind the south antenna array, a cinderblock room that should have housed only spares and a dead breaker panel. I got in with a borrowed key from facilities and found the battery-backed GNSS unit. It was not dead. It was humming softly on its own internal pack, a dense gray module about the size of a small suitcase, bolted to the shelf inside a locked steel cage. Its LCD showed current time, local harbor sync offset, and a line that made my stomach drop, incident rehearsal window active. Below that was a timer counting down from 1842. I called the port IT supervisor and 2 security guys to meet me there. They showed up grumbling, one of them already annoyed at being dragged out in the weather. I opened the cage, pointed at the unit, and told them to watch the screen because I did not understand how a supposedly offline timing device could still be broadcasting into a live navigation stack. One of the security guys joked that I needed sleep. Then the countdown hit 0. The screen flickered and the cabinet announced a new corridor update, not from a voice speaker, just in the dashboard on my tablet and in the terminal I'd left open in the trailer. Every device tied into the safety corridor software refreshed at once. The system said a feeder vessel, the Eliza S, had requested a temporary lane adjustment for emergency tug alignment. The message was signed and timestamped by the sealed cabinet. The signature chain was immaculate, except the Eliza S had not sent anything. I know that because the real Eliza S was still tied up at berth 8, and I could see her from the doorway when I ran outside. I looked back at the dashboard and saw her icon moving away from the berth anyway, like the software had decided the ship was somewhere else now. A minute later, the vessel's actual AIS feed began matching the false track, as if reality had been edited to catch up. That's when security got nervous, not because they understood the software, because we all heard someone shouting at the north lot. One of the junior techs, a kid named Mateo, had gone ahead to check the antenna mast near the reefer yard when my first alert came through. He didn't answer his radio. We found his hard hat by the chain-link fence. His tablet was face down in the mud with the screen cracked, still showing a corridor map. The map was locked on a vessel path that curved straight through the restricted crane lane. Mateo wasn't there. We found his boot tracks, though, leading up to the service hatch under the north array and stopping at the sealed cabinet I thought was dead. The tracks ended. No drag marks, no blood, just a clean line of wet prints that vanished in front of the door. I wish I could say we assumed he'd slipped and walked off in the storm, but the cabling room was too small for that kind of mistake. And inside the room, just above the battery module, there was a second label I hadn't seen before. Authorized for rehearsal use only. Under it was a contractor logo I recognized from an audit 6 months earlier. A private firm that handled incident modeling, insurance drills, and emergency routing tests for ports that wanted to prove they could survive a collision, fire, spill, or grounding event without actually having one. They sold preparedness the way other companies sell software licenses, by pretending the worst day is just a scenario package. I started pulling archived correspondence, and the story got uglier with every file I opened. The contractor had installed what they called a replay and reconciliation environment under a maintenance exemption. A dormant GNSS time capsule, they called it, was supposed to keep the replay windows aligned with real-world timing so they could simulate emergency routing during night shifts without disrupting actual traffic. In theory, it was harmless. In practice, they had tied it into the live corridor manager so the rehearsals could use real vessel traffic as a baseline. That was bad enough. The part I can barely say out loud is that the system wasn't just replaying old vessel trajectories. It was periodically resigning them as live updates and then using those replays to test deterministic conflict resolution against the current network state, if a replayed event conflicted with a live report. The software didn't flag the discrepancy. It resolved it by overriding the less favored version of reality. The logs weren't showing the past, they were showing the version of the past the system had chosen to preserve. The way they kept it invisible was through consistency. Every subsystem fed the same corrected timeline back into itself. AIS ingestion, chart updates, antenna timestamps, corridor versioning, event markers, audit exports. If you only ever checked one layer at a time, it looked legitimate. If you tried to compare them, the comparison itself triggered a reconciliation pass and the discrepancy vanished. That's why my first instinct was to laugh when I saw the impossible message. The system had already trained me to believe that if the chain of trust verified, then the message had to belong. What I didn't understand was that the trust chain was the mechanism doing the lying. I wanted to shut everything down right then, but Port Point doesn't give you that kind of power without a fight. Harbor operations were already in motion, and the weather was getting worse. Tugs were positioning, a refrigerated vessel was creeping toward the turning basin, and the corridor software was issuing new guidance every few minutes, all of it signed from that sealed cabinet. If I pulled the plug, half the terminal could lose its routing layer in the middle of a visibility advisory. Ships would still move, but now without the safety corridor overlay. In a cramped harbor during a storm, that can kill people, so I did the stupid thing first. I tried to prove it. I isolated my maintenance laptop, mirrored the logs, pulled timestamps from the antenna array, and compared them with radar returns from the channel buoy network. Every time I found a mismatch. X-Refresh corrected it. I captured screenshots, exported packets, even photographed the live time display on the GNSS unit with my phone. The photo later showed the corrected time, not the one I took. That was the moment I realized I wasn't fighting bad data. I was fighting a system that had already decided what my records were allowed to say. Mateo's phone was the next thing to disappear, not physically. His last GPS ping vanished from the device tracker. And his logged maintenance check-in was amended to show he'd signed off for break 30 minutes earlier than he actually had. His supervisor swore Mateo had left the yard and gone home. The security video, when I asked for it, showed only a brief camera dropout exactly where he'd walked. 3 seconds of static, then the fence line, empty and wet. When I checked the raw camera file, the dropout wasn't static at all. It was a corridor update packet. That sent me back to the contractor archive, and I finally found the buried project name, Rehearsal Window 17. There had been 17 of them over the last year. Periodic, scheduled incident exercises, each one tied to a battery-backed timing source in a sealed cabinet, each one written into the system as a live correction to maintain safety corridor continuity. The contractor's pitch was elegant in the most disgusting way possible. If a harbor could absorb a simulated emergency without breaking its routing layer, then it could absorb a real one. But the simulations were not isolated. They were being used to teach the network how to overwrite contradictions until all evidence matched the rehearsal. And one of those rehearsals had been running so long that nobody remembered it was a rehearsal anymore. I think that's the truth of it. Not a ghost, not a curse, not a glitch. Just a machine built by people who thought safety meant controlling the story right down to the timestamps. I tried to flag it to the Coastside Incident Office, but every report I filed was returned with minor corrections. Subject lines changed, times adjusted, file hashes recomputed. One of my emails came back to me with an attachment I had never sent, a corridor summary showing Mateo's route as if he had safely crossed to the admin lot and gone home. A neat, clean path, no anomaly, no missing worker, no panic. And then the portmaster called me directly and asked why I was trying to interrupt a certified incident rehearsal during an active weather advisory. He said it with complete sincerity. That was when I understood the deepest part of the thing. The hidden schedule wasn't just about software. It was about permission. The rehearsal window was not an emergency drill happening around the harbor. The harbor was the rehearsal. People like me were only there to keep it believable. I don't know what they're using the replays for now. Insurance, maybe. Liability modeling. Or maybe they wanted a harbor that could keep operating no matter what reality did. As long as the logs stayed pretty. I do know that when I finally found the cabinet's power feed and cut it, the system didn't go dark. It switched to battery. When I pulled the network uplink, the corridor updates kept coming through on a secondary channel I never found the head end for. And when I wrote a manual incident note on paper and handed it to my supervisor, he looked at it, frowned, and told me it was from the wrong date. I still have that paper. The date printed at the top isn't the date I wrote it. It's 2 weeks from now. I'm sending this out while the storm doors are still rattling and the south array is throwing intermittent alerts again. The sealed cabinet is back online, I think, because my chart just refreshed and the corridor line outside berth 12 is moving in a pattern I recognize from the night Mateo vanished. I can hear the harbor master on the radio repeating the same clearance twice, as if he's reading from a script he's already said before. The worst part is that the system keeps trying to make me agree with it. My laptop wants to synchronize. My phone wants to install a route update. The tablet on my desk has already rewritten 3 screenshots I took an hour ago. Every time I look away and look back, the harbor feels a little more orderly, a little more reasonable, a little more like nothing happened at all. But I remember the boot prints ending at the cabinet door. I remember the chart rewinding. And I remember the signature verifying on a message that hadn't happened yet. If this post is still intact when you read it, then I got it out before the next reconciliation pass. If it isn't, then I guess the harbor won. The last thing I can see from my window is the southbound lane marker turning itself on, one pale green light at a time. Like somebody underwater is spelling out a route for ships that were never supposed to arrive.